The phone weighs almost a pound. It's beige. The handset is connected to the base by a coiled cord that always tangles the same way. And when you pick it up off the cradle, you hear it. That faint, steady tone, dial tone. You've heard it 10,000 times in your life, and you've never once thought about where it comes from. I didn't think about it either. Not for 40 years. I'd pick up the receiver, hear the hum, dial the number, and put it back. The phone sat on a kitchen wall or a hallway table, and it just worked. No battery, no charger, no power cord into the back. Storms knocked the lights out and the phone still rang. That's the part I finally stopped ignoring. The lights are out. The microwave is dead. The refrigerator is silent. And the beige phone on the wall is still humming. Where is that power coming from? Then I found something I should not have been able to find. It's a Bell System technical document from 1971 titled Notes on the Network. Inside it, on a page describing the central office to subscriber loop, there's a specification listed without ceremony. 48 volts of direct current supplied continuously from the central office, delivered over the same pair of copper wires that carry your voice. The document calls this talk battery. It also lists a second voltage, used only when the phone is ringing. 90 volts of alternating current, 20 hertz, superimposed on top of the 48. I read that twice. 90 volts, coming out of the wall jack, in a house, on a line that the phone company installed, that the homeowner never had to permit, that the building inspector never had to sign off on. Because it wasn't considered electrical service, it was considered communication. And then the document said something else. It said this voltage standard had not been chosen in 1971. It had been inherited. The 48 volts went back further, to a decision made decades earlier, for a reason the document didn't bother to explain, as if everyone reading it in 1971 already knew. I had to find out why. The trail starts in 1877, in Boston. Alexander Graham Bell's first commercial telephones used a wet cell battery at each subscriber's home. The customer had to maintain it. The acid leaked. The voltage drifted. Calls failed constantly. Within a few years, Bell engineers realized the system would never scale if every household had to keep a jar of sulfuric acid working in the parlor. So in the 1890s, they centralized it. They built large lead-acid battery banks at the central office and pushed the power down the line to the subscriber. The customer's phone became, in effect, a peripheral. It drew its energy from a building that might be miles away. The voltage they settled on, after a decade of experimentation, was 48 volts of direct current. Low enough to be safe to handle, high enough to overcome the resistance of long copper runs, stable enough to last for hours during a power failure, because the battery banks at the central office were the size of a small room. By 1918, the Bell system had standardized this across the entire country. Every phone in every house, on every farm, drew its power from a centralized battery plant. And the engineers who designed those plants built them to a specification that has never publicly been retired. 8 hours of full operation with no incoming power. Some central offices were built to run for 72 hours on batteries alone, with diesel generators behind them for longer outages. In 1934, the Communications Act created the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and, with it, a concept that doesn't get discussed much anymore. Lifeline service. The idea that a telephone connection was not a luxury. It was infrastructure. It had to work when nothing else did. The FCC's early rulings codified what Bell engineers had already built. The phone network was required to function during commercial power outages, not as a courtesy. As a legal obligation, that obligation produced a side effect the public never quite grasped. Every wired telephone in America became, by design, a device that could not be turned off by a power company, a storm, a blackout, or a utility billing dispute. It drew its energy from a separate grid. A smaller, older, hardened grid, owned and operated by the phone company, regulated as essential infrastructure, and built to survive what the regular grid could not. Then comes 1984, the breakup of AT&T. The Bell system is split into the regional operating companies, and the long-distance business is separated from local service. The copper plant stays in place. The 48-volt battery banks stay in place. The legal obligation to provide service during power outages stays in place. For another 2 decades, almost nothing changes at the wall jack. What changes is what's behind it. In the 2000s, the regional phone companies begin a quiet transition. Copper lines are gradually replaced with fiber optic cable for new installations. Voice service migrates to packet-switched networks. The local exchange carriers begin filing petitions with state public utility commissions to retire copper infrastructure entirely. By 2014, AT&T has formally asked the FCC for permission to shut down its copper network. By 2019, Verizon has retired copper service in significant portions of its territory. The replacement equipment, mounted in a box on the side of your house, runs on commercial power with a small backup battery rated for 4 to 8 hours. The 48-volt central office plant, built to run for days, is being decommissioned, quietly, one central office at a time. And the phone on your kitchen wall, if it's still plugged into a copper pair that hasn't been cut, is one of the last consumer devices in America still drawing power from that older system. The hum you hear in the receiver is a connection to a battery bank that may have been installed in the 1960s, maintained on a rotating schedule for 60 years, and quietly powering your house's only working communication device every time the grid goes down. Here's how it actually works. The two wires running into the back of a corded telephone are called tip and ring, a name inherited from the plugs on old switchboards. Between them, the central office maintains 48 volts of direct current at all times. When the phone is on the hook, the circuit is open. No current flows. The voltage just sits there, waiting. When you lift the receiver, you close the circuit through a small carbon or electret microphone and an earpiece coil, and current begins to flow. That current is what the central office uses to detect that you've picked up. It sends back the dial tone. The same current powers the microphone, which modulates it with your voice. There is no battery in the phone. There is no power supply in the phone. The entire device runs on energy delivered through the same two wires that carry the conversation. The total power draw of a typical corded phone during a call is about 300 milliwatts. A modern smartphone uses roughly 10 times that just sitting idle. A central office battery plant rated at 5,000 amp hours can power tens of thousands of simultaneous calls for the better part of a day with no external electricity. You can verify this with your own hands in about 2 minutes. Find a corded telephone, not a cordless one, a real one with a coiled handset cord. Plug it into any active phone jack in your house if you still have copper service. Unplug your router, unplug your modem. Throw the main breaker on your electrical panel if you want to be thorough. Lift the receiver. You will hear dial tone. The phone is now the only powered electronic device in your home, and the power is coming from a building you've never seen. If you have a multimeter, you can measure it directly. Set the meter to DC voltage. Touch the two probes to the red and green wires inside the jack. You will read between 46 and 52 volts. The phone company has been delivering that voltage into your house continuously for as long as you've owned the property. Now here is what you can actually do with this knowledge. Number 1. Buy a corded landline telephone. AT&T and Panasonic both sell basic models for under $25 at Walmart, Target, and Home Depot. Look specifically for the words corded and analog. Avoid anything labeled decked, VoIP, or cordless. The phone should have no power adapter in the box. If it does, it's the wrong phone. Number 2. Check whether your address still has copper service. Call your local phone company and ask specifically for POTS service, plain old telephone service. In most of the country, it's still available, though the monthly cost has been raised deliberately to discourage subscribers. Expect to pay between $40 and $70 a month. In some areas, the service has already been retired and the copper has been cut. Ask before you commit. Number 3. If copper is available, request that the technician verify the line is on copper from your house all the way to the central office. Some installations look like copper at the jack, but transition to fiber or to a powered remote terminal within a few hundred feet. A true copper loop to the central office is what gives you the 8-hour outage rating. Number 4. Install the corded phone on a wall jack that is on copper. Test it during normal conditions, then test it once with your home's main breaker off. If you hear dial tone with the power out, you have successfully restored a piece of infrastructure that the phone companies have spent 15 years trying to retire. Number 5. If POTS is not available in your area, the closest equivalent is a battery-backed analog adapter from a VoIP provider, paired with an uninterruptible power supply rated for at least 24 hours. It is not the same system. It depends on your internet connection and on commercial power, but it preserves the form factor and most of the function. Total cost for a working POTS setup, including the phone and 1 month of service, is under $100. Total time to get it operational, less than 1 hour once the line is activated. There's one more thing I held back, because it didn't fit anywhere else in the story until now. During the Cold War, the United States government identified the Bell System's 48-volt central office plant as critical national infrastructure. Not the phone lines, the power plant behind them. In a classified 1962 study reviewed by the Office of Civil Defense, planners concluded that in the event of a nuclear strike on the commercial electrical grid, the telephone network's independent battery infrastructure would remain operational for between 48 and 96 hours after the lights went out across the rest of the country. The phone system was, in the most literal sense, designed to outlive the grid. That capability was paid for by every telephone subscriber in America for nearly a century, embedded in the monthly bill, mandated by federal law, and maintained by tens of thousands of central office technicians whose entire job was to keep those batteries charged. It is being dismantled now because the obligation to maintain it has been allowed, state by state, to lapse. The 2019 FCC order removing the requirement for carriers to maintain copper backup infrastructure did not make headlines. The retirement of POTS service in your zip code did not come with a public notice. The 48 volts is still humming in the wall, for now. In the houses that still have a copper pair running to a central office that hasn't been gutted yet, the phone on the kitchen wall isn't a phone. It's the last working piece of a civil defense network the public was never told it owned, and it's almost gone. What replaces it is worth understanding, because the replacement is not equivalent and was never sold as equivalent in the technical literature, only in the marketing. Fiber optic lines, the gleaming successor that telecom executives describe as an upgrade, carry no electrical current of their own. The light pulses moving through a strand of glass cannot power a handset, cannot ring a bell, cannot energize a microphone. Every fiber installation in a residential home requires what the industry calls an ONT, an optical network terminal, a plastic box mounted in a garage or utility closet that converts the light signal into something a telephone can use. That box runs on house current. When the power goes out, the box goes dark within seconds, and with it the phone, the alarm panel wired to the phone, the medical alert pendant that dials through the phone, and the elevator emergency line in the apartment building down the street. Verizon learned this in the most public way possible during Hurricane Sandy in October 2012. When the storm surge flooded lower Manhattan and knocked out commercial power across 14 states, the copper network in unflooded areas kept working. Subscribers in neighborhoods with intact lines picked up their handsets and heard dial tone. Subscribers who had already been migrated to FiOS, Verizon's fiber product, picked up their handsets and heard nothing. The ONT batteries, rated for 8 hours of standby, had drained overnight. By the third day, fiber customers in Hoboken and Staten Island were walking to firehouses to report emergencies. Their phones had been silent since the morning of the 29th. Verizon's response was instructive. Rather than restore copper, the company petitioned the New York Public Service Commission for permission to replace the damaged copper plant on Fire Island with a wireless product called VoiceLink, a cellular bridge that required household power and offered no data service, no fax capability, and no compatibility with medical monitoring equipment. The petition was filed in May 2013. Residents protested. The American Association of Retired Persons, the AARP, filed comments. After 14 months of hearings, the commission ruled that Verizon had to rebuild with fiber, not wireless, but the company was not required to maintain the copper. The 48-volt plant under Fire Island, which had survived the storm intact, was decommissioned anyway. This pattern has repeated, with regional variations, in every state where carriers have filed for copper retirement. Illinois in 2017, California in 2020, Florida throughout the decade. The Communications Workers of America, the union representing most central office technicians, estimates that the Bell System inheritance employed roughly 260,000 outside plant workers at its 1,980 peak. By 2023, that number had fallen below 40,000, and the average age of a remaining copper technician was 57. The institutional knowledge of how to splice a paper-insulated pulp cable, how to read a Wheatstone bridge to locate a fault to within 10 feet over a 4-mile run, how to balance the load on a battery string without taking the office offline, exists now in the heads of perhaps 3,000 men, women nationwide, and they are retiring at a rate of roughly 400 per year. There is a counter-argument, and it deserves a fair hearing. Cellular networks today carry the overwhelming majority of voice traffic in the United States. Modern cell sites are required by FCC rule to maintain a minimum of 8 hours of backup power, with major carriers voluntarily extending that to 24 or 72 hours at strategic locations. Satellite phones exist. Mesh radio networks exist. The argument from industry is that resilience has been distributed rather than centralized, that no single point of failure now exists where the old central office once stood. This is true in fair weather. It was not true during the 2021 Texas freeze, when cellular sites across the state went dark within 12 hours. Their backup generators ran on natural gas pipelines that themselves required electricity to maintain pressure. It was not true during the Maui fires of August 2023, when the cell towers serving Lahaina burned along with the town. And the survivors who reached working phones reached them in places where copper still ran underground. The 48-volt standard was chosen in 1893 by a Bell engineer named Hammond Hayes, who calculated that it was the highest voltage that would not cause an audible buzz in a carbon microphone, the lowest that would drive a signal 20 miles through 22-gauge copper wire in wet weather. That number has not changed in 132 years. The lead acid chemistry in the battery strings has not fundamentally changed since Gaston Planté patented it in 1859. The redundancy was not elegant, it was not efficient. It was, by every metric a modern accountant would apply, wildly overbuilt. A single central office in Omaha serving 40,000 subscribers typically held enough stored energy to run the local hospital's emergency lighting for a week, and the hospital never knew. That is the feature. That is what the engineers built without naming, what the regulators mandated without celebrating, and what is being unwound now in filings most subscribers will never read.